Welcome to Your Cyber Path, the podcast that helps you get your dream cybersecurity job by sharing the secrets of experienced hiring managers and top cybersecurity professionals with you. Now, on to the show.
Hi, I'm Kip Boyle, and Jason Dion is here with me. And today we're going to talk about the 5 things that you need to know before you get into cybersecurity. Hey, Jason.
Hey, Kip. It's great to be here again.
So, and we're glad you're here with us, everybody in our audience. So there's 5 things. So I think we should just dive right into them. And here's the first thing that we think you really need to know. There are no real entry-level cybersecurity jobs. And that is a complete brain-melting thing for me to say for a lot of people. There's so much conversation online about how there should be entry-level jobs and how come there aren't ever entry-level jobs. And recently I caught a post on LinkedIn where somebody was talking about how unfair it was, and they were really railing on it. And so I jumped in and I said, well, look, this is kind of like in the airline industry, there is such a thing as an entry level 747 job, right? Like all 787 pilots have to start somewhere, right?
Yep.
And so that first 787 job is the entry level job. But you can't just walk off the street and get it. You've got to build up to it, right? You need like 25,000 hours of commercial flight time in order to be able to even qualify for that job. And so I put that in the comment. And for a week and a half, I kept getting notifications from LinkedIn about people reacting to that comment. And I didn't keep close track, but it seemed to me that it was roughly split between, half the people saying, yep, that's right, that's the way I see it, Kip, I agree with you. And the other half of the people saying, what's your address? I'm going to, put a flaming bag of poo on your doorstep.
Well, I think it's important when we talk about entry-level jobs, right? Entry-level means different things in different industries. When I started out and got my first entry-level job, I got a job as a bag boy at a grocery store, right? That's an entry-level job. They could hire me, and by the end of that first day, I was already doing useful work for them by putting groceries into bags and taking it to customers' cars. That's
Right.
entry-level, right? Cybersecurity is a little bit different. I can't take somebody off the street, put them in the chair, slap a name tag on them and say, go ahead, you're a SOC analyst. It doesn't work that way. There's extra knowledge you need, just like you can't go and fly a Dreamliner 787 after your first day of flight school. And I think people have a misconception with that. And I think a lot of that, I actually place the blame on the colleges for this, because they like to say, oh, there's all this huge demand for cybersecurity jobs and all these entry-level jobs are available. And they push people through to go get a bachelor's or master's degree, and then nobody wants to hire that person because they have no experience, because they've never done anything in IT at all. And really, when it comes to an entry-level cybersecurity job, in my mind, that is usually going to be something like a system administrator, a network administrator, a help desk, a field service technician, something in the IT world where you've gotten some experience for a couple of years, and then you move into this entry-level cybersecurity job of being a SOC analyst. Because as a SOC analyst, you have to understand how computers work, what normal looks like in the network, what normal looks like for the processes and your registry on the computer. And if you don't know all that, you can't be an entry-level cybersecurity analyst. I think that's where the big breakdown is with that myth of that there's no, quote, real cybersecurity entry-level jobs, because there are, but they require some prerequisites to get into those jobs.
Yeah, that's right. I think the term entry level is just an overloaded term. I think you put your finger right on it. People are using it in ways that are not true to the traditional, definition of that, right? Like, that I can get hired as a bag boy, or I can be hired at McDonald's, and I don't need to know anything. I just need to have some basic ability to show up on time for my shift, right? Clean and presentable. So that term is absolutely overloaded. And that's kind of what I was trying to get at, when I responded to that LinkedIn post, was trying to explain, that it's different. But there's so much about cybersecurity that just doesn't translate. And this is something we're gonna talk about in a moment in the second thing, having to do with bachelor's degrees. But before we do that, I want to tell everybody in the audience just a couple of things. So if you really want to unpack this idea here, we actually did that very recently in episode 49. So if you just go back to yourcyberpath.com/, is it just 49, Jason?
That's
Is that
correct.
the way that worked? Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So just do that and you'll be able to pull up that episode and you can listen to it and really kind of dig deep in there. The other thing I'd recommend is go to cyberseek.org. And when you go over there, they have a career pathway. That's one of the things that they offer. And when you go over there and click on that, you're going to see exactly what we're talking about. You're going to see 4 columns of different types of jobs. And on the left, it's going to start with feeder role. And then the next column over is entry level. So right there on the cyberseek.org website, which I think of as sort of like the master directory for, what's going on in the job market, right there, it talks about exactly what Jason was just explaining.
Yep, exactly. So again, it's yourcyberpath.com/49. It'll take you right to episode 49, which is why entry-level jobs aren't really entry-level. All right, our second one is that a cybersecurity's bachelor's degree or master's degree is going to guarantee you to land a job. Or you can get a certification and it's going to be your golden ticket to employment. Now, really, this is not true. You can get a degree at either a bachelor's or master's level, and you can get a certification, and it will help you get a job, yes. But it is not going to be the golden ticket that's going to automatically get you the job. What I always tell my certification students is the certification does not guarantee you a job. Instead, it's going to help you get the interview. And then when you're in the interview, you can impress that hiring manager with your knowledge, your skills, maybe your experience if you have it, and that's how you're going to get a job. It's an invitation to the ball. It's not a guarantee that you're going to get a dance.
Oh, I love it. I love it, man. Is there a glass slipper somewhere in this?
If it fits, you get the job.
Yeah, right. That's right. If your foot can fit in the glass slipper, you get the job. That's great. That's great. And so, I see this all the time, and it's actually tragic, Jason. It goes from what you said a moment ago, where you said that that universities and colleges are telling people if you just get your bachelor's degree or your master's degree, there's all these entry level jobs waiting for you. Well, I have met lots of people who have done exactly that, taken on tons of debt, and they're walking around like zombies because they can't get interviews. The interviews that they sometimes get don't go past the first one, and I feel awful for people who get themselves into the situation. And I think part of the misunderstanding here, and this goes back to my previous comment, that there's a lot of rules of thumb in the broader economy of the United States that just don't apply to cybersecurity. But for the longest time, the kind of the trope is that if you got a bachelor's degree, that was like your guaranteed ticket to a middle class job, right? And that that you could get hired and make a middle class income just by having a college degree. And that may be true in some parts of our modern economy, but it's absolutely not the case here in cybersecurity, as you just said. So the conventional wisdom, just like with entry level jobs, just doesn't really wash in this career field. And it's awful that people have to discover that the hard way.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes I see people make is not necessarily the bachelor's degree, but I see a lot of people who go and get their bachelor's and their master's degree, and they've never worked a day in their life at a regular job. So then they come up to me as a hiring manager, and they're asking for a job, and they have a master's degree with all that student loan debt. And so they're looking for a first-time job, trying to make $80,000 to $100,000 or $120,000 a year, and they have zero experience. They may have a couple of certifications, they have a master's degree, and they think that makes them qualified. And unfortunately, it doesn't, because for those level jobs, I need somebody with experience. And so for you to start at the beginning of that pipeline with a master's degree is going to be way too little money for you, and so you've kind of overextended yourself. Where I see the benefit of degrees inside of our field is once you've had a job, you've worked for a couple of years, and you're trying to make the move into management, that's usually when we're looking for that bachelor's or master's degree. If you want to be the SOC director, I'm going to expect you to have a master's degree, but I'm also going to expect you to have 5 or 10 years of experience being a SOC analyst. And so if you have the degree with no experience, I'm not going to make you the SOC director.
Right.
Similarly, if you have a degree and no experience, I may or may not be able to hire you on as an entry-level SOC analyst, because at least you'll have the knowledge and the background. But again, it's going to be harder when you're going against somebody who has 3 or 4 years in the field as a cybersecurity technician or a security administrator or a network administrator to make that leap. So what is our third one, Kip?
Yeah. Okay. So wait a minute. Before we go on to the third one, can I just mention that we've got a couple of podcast episodes that people can listen to if you want to unpack this some more. There is more to say, but we're not going to say it today. So if you want to go grab episode 55, which is a very recent one where we talked about which cybersecurity certificate you should get, and actually we have another episode. I mean, get in the Wayback Machine, Mr. Peabody, because this goes back to episode number 4, which is where we did a survey to find out what people's big questions were about getting into cybersecurity. And this was actually one of the big questions, which a lot of people thought that the only way they could get into cyber was by having formal training, bachelor's degrees, certifications. And so anyway, so we busted that myth. But let's go on to the third thing that you need to know before you get into cybersecurity. And this one's also very difficult. It really, people really struggle with this, right? But you have to have experience or no one will hire you. And that's just what you were saying, Jason. And this is a catch-22 for a lot of people. And they complain and they get really bitter. And they're like, well, the reason I don't have experience is because nobody will hire me, but nobody will hire me because I don't have experience. And oh, it's awful. It's really awful. But I'm sorry to say it's true. It's absolutely true.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at hiring somebody, right, there's 3 things we're looking for. We're looking for experience, we're looking for certifications, and we're looking for degrees. And we look at them in that order. Experience is paramount, but experience won't get you the interview if you don't have the certification that matches my ATS search criteria. And so we're not even going to see your application in the hiring pile. So you need to have that certification to make it through the filter. But then when you go to that interview, it's all about your experience. And your experience is going to be asked about, and it's going to be shown through your questions and answers you're giving in that interview. And that's really how you land the job. So it has to be this combination of those 2 things. And if you don't have experience, there's a lot of different ways you can work on getting experience. What are a couple of key ways you'd recommend, Kip?
So here are the 2 top ways that I tell people. Number 1, build a home lab. And in the past, that meant going and getting physical hardware. Some people I know actually got like a rack from a data center, right? An old surplus rack or something like that. And they would actually rack like a router, a switch, a couple of servers, whatever. And then they'd get like a KVM switch so they could share one keyboard, one monitor, and one mouse with all of that gear. And you don't need to do that anymore. I do not recommend that anymore because everything is going to cloud. So really what you need to do is still build that home lab, but do it in AWS or do it in Azure, wherever, whatever cloud provider you think makes the most sense based on the employer that you're trying to get your job with. But that way you have a safe little sandbox. You can play with all this technology and you know what? You can blow it all up. Not a problem. You press a button and it just kind of goes right back to its default settings. It's a nice, safe place to figure out how all this stuff works. And that's a particularly good way to go about it when you're trying to get your A+, your Network Plus, and your Security Plus, right, Jason?
Yeah, most certainly. I use cloud-based labs in all of my courses at diontraining.com. So when students buy a course from us for A+, Net Plus, Security Plus, CISA, Pentest Plus, whatever it is, we have 40 hours of labs that are pre-built with different challenges in there for you to work through those things. So if you're doing Pentest Plus, you're going to be hacking into machines and learning how to throw these exploits.
Yeah.
Then you should go off and build your own lab and expand on that knowledge even further in
Absolutely.
a non-directed way. And I really think labs are a great way to show experience, especially when you're sitting down with the hiring manager and they ask, have you ever used Nmap to do a scan? You can say, yes, I have. I scanned all these different servers, machines, and I saw these type of things in my cloud environment that I've built. And it shows that you're really going after it and you're building experience on your own. So I think that's a really good suggestion. You said good too. What's the second one?
Yeah. So the second one is you need to volunteer. All right. Because here's the thing. Cybersecurity skills are in short supply. You know that. That's why you're trying to break into this industry. Well, it turns out that there's a lot of nonprofit organizations out there who absolutely could use your help, but they can't afford to pay anybody or not very much in order to get this kind of help. So what a match made in heaven, right? You're trying to learn, you know something, you're willing to study, you're willing to put in the time. Well, these folks are just waiting for people like you to come along. So think about a cause that's important to you. Could be anything at all. Could it be have something to do with animals? Could have something to do with the environment? Could be some kind of a human services organization or a religious institute. Doesn't matter. Just something that appeals to you, and then start going out there, making contact with decision makers in the types of organizations that you would like to contribute to, and tell them, hey, I'm learning cybersecurity, and I see that you have a website. Can I help you make sure that that website is attack resistant? Or, whatever it is they have, an email server, or, just take a look at them and just approach them and start someplace. Now, you may be turned down. the first time you go because they don't know you. But be persistent, be willing to offer references, be willing to start small so you can build trust. This industry operates on trust. That's almost the fuel in the tank. And trust is something that you got to build over time. You start small, you iterate, and trust will grow from there. But that's my second suggestion. What do you think about that, Jason?
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. One thing I was going to recommend is if you're going to one of these organizations, for instance, your local church will probably say yes and let you do it. But if you try to go to the Red Cross, which is a nonprofit, but they're a nationwide or worldwide nonprofit, they have their own cybersecurity folks. They're not going to let you touch their network. So you've got to make sure you're looking at the right size organization. If they have 50 or less employees, that's probably the right organization for you to try
That's
to
a
get your foot
great
in the
point.
door.
That's
The
a
other
great
thing
point.
I recommend is that there's a great organization known as Cyber Patriot here in the United States. And they actually work with high schoolers, and they have different teams of high schoolers who play in these capture the flag competitions of attack and defend. And they're always looking for mentors. So guess what? They're not going to ask, do you have a job in cybersecurity? They're not going to ask what certifications you have or what degrees you have. If you want to volunteer and be part of the team and help mentor those folks, they will take you because every high school is trying to field a Cyber Patriot team. And not every high school has a cybersecurity expert. So it's
That's
a really
great.
easy way for you to get in and build the experience. And I can tell you, when I see that on your resume, I know that you're going out there and you're doing attack and defend type things. You're learning, you're growing, and you're making use of that skill set. And that's really going to help you in the job market.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think the final thing I want to say about this is don't don't confuse experience that you are paid for versus experience that you are volunteering for. I've had people say to me, "Well, I don't have experience," and then I'll unpack a little bit what's going on. Turns out they have a ton of experience, but they thought they had to be paid in order for it to count. No, absolutely not. So don't let that stop you.
Yeah, I mean, I personally did some volunteering with my son's Boy Scout troop, and there's a cybersecurity badge. So you can go to the local Boy Scout troop and say, hey, I would like to help your guys earn their cybersecurity merit badge. And you'll go through, and basically it's like studying for a certification, and you'll help the Boy Scouts do that, and you'll get experience for working with them for the next 2 months or so to get that badge.
And the
If you
Girl
want to
Scouts have the same thing.
Yep. And if you want to learn more about this, we do have an episode. It was actually the last episode, episode 58, which was how to get hired with no experience. And here's where we actually interviewed one of my students, Ed, who got a job with no experience, and he was able to work his way up through connections, through networking, and things of that nature, and by doing some of these things we're talking about. So it's definitely a great listen. If you didn't listen to last week's episode, I recommend you go back and check that out. Kip, our number 4 tip I'm going to give is that salary expectations have to be in pair with reality. And I see a lot of people who have this expectation that they're going to get their first cybersecurity job and they're going to make $100,000 a year on day one. And that's just not the reality for most people in most places here in the United States. What are your thoughts on salary expectations? How can people have a better, realistic view on what they should expect to see?
Right. Yes. Well, first of all, you're going to see a lot of crazy data being thrown around, especially by, colleges, universities, boot camps, anybody who can make money by telling you that you can make a ton of money. So to just, first of all, bring some healthy skepticism to the party. Okay. Now, here's the real challenge is that finding reliable salary data is extremely difficult. Salary data is going to vary based on geography. It's going to vary based on the type of employer. So you could have the same job at 2 completely different organizations. Let's say your job is cybersecurity analyst, all right? That job might pay $95,000 because it's a mid-level job, and $95,000 might be, say, for a company that has so let's say 700 employees or 1,000 employees or something like that. But that job at a much larger company that has 10,000 or 20,000 employees will probably pay more. And that same job at a small organization with 100 people is probably going to pay less. So what I always tell people is get clear on what kind of company and what industry you'd like to work in, because industry matters too. If you go work in financial services, you're going to get a different pay rate than if you work in the Department of Defense for a defense contractor or something like that. So just keep that in mind that you first have to be really, really clear on what industry, what size of employer. Okay, then what you can do is you can go out to cyberseek.org. Big surprise. We mentioned that again. This is a really great website. If you go out to cyberseek.org, you can actually query their interactive map, which will give you all kinds of information about the types of jobs that have been offered over the past 6 months, because CyberSeek is a backward-looking data set. So you're not going to find jobs on there per se, but you're going to see some trending information, and you can then take that information and then you can pivot over to, for example, LinkedIn.com and their jobs function, and then you can do some more research to find salary ranges. Episode 13 from a long time ago. I can't believe we're up to episode 59 now, but episode 13, I talk about how exactly to do that, how to get on cyberseek.org and find those salary ranges so that you can ground yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to ground yourself here because I'm going to give you a quick story here, Kip, if you don't mind.
Please.
My first job as a college professor was actually at a community college up in Anne Arundel County at Anne Arundel Community College, which is up in Maryland. So in that college, we had a one-year program where we got people their A+, their Network+, their Security+, their CCNA, and a year of experience hands-on in our lab. And then we would help place them into a job into 3 main companies. There were some in Northern Virginia, some in DC, and then some in Anne Arundel County. Now, depending on where those students took the same job of being a cybersecurity analyst with the exact same experience, they came from having no experience to having 4 certs and a year of experience, they were getting hired between $40,000, $60,000, and $80,000 a year for that first entry-level job, which was awesome because they had no experience coming into this, right? But this just shows you how there's a huge difference just based on location alone and based on if it was Northern Virginia, DC, or Maryland, that made a difference. If they were in DC, they were making $70,000 to $80,000. If they were in Maryland, they were making $40,000 to $50,000. If they were down in Northern Virginia, it was $50,000 to $60,000. And it was really dependent on the company they went to and the location because DC was more expensive, so they had to pay people more money. So it's important to keep that in mind as well. If you're going to work in Kansas or San Francisco, those are 2 vastly different salary ranges based on the cost of living in those areas.
Yeah. Well,
Oh,
I was
sorry.
going to say, Jason, there's one more wrinkle that I think we should mention for folks, which is because of the COVID pandemic and the quarantines, some companies are actually switching to workforces that are remote. Sometimes it's all remote. Sometimes, there's just large quantities of people who are remote, and some people are still coming into the offices. And the kind of feedback that I'm getting on that is that some organizations are actually trying to do kind of like a salary arbitrage, right? So they'd say like, well, if you come work in the San Francisco office, we'll pay you $200,000 a year. Or you can stay in Kansas City and we'll pay you $150,000 a year or $120,000 a year or whatever, because they know that a $200,000 salary isn't going to go very far in San Francisco, but it's going to go really far in Kansas City. And so they feel like, that gives them permission to vary the salaries based on where the person is located at. Now, I don't even want to unpack the question about is that ethical? Is it fair? Is it legal? Whatever. I'm not trying to, kind of go there. I just want to point out that's kind of a new thing that I've never seen before. In the past, remote jobs were pretty much salaried at what it was all pretty much the same across the board. But I've just noticed that some employers are starting to vary that. So, right. So that's 4 down, 1 to go. You ready for the 5th one, Jason?
Yeah, what do you have for number 5?
So the 5th thing that you need to know before you get into cybersecurity is that there are more than just network penetration testing jobs. Big surprise. I don't know if you knew that. If you're listening to this episode right now and you're like, yeah, I want to be a pen tester because, that was what, the movie that I watch or whatever, the television show that I watch. And that's kind of, mostly what you've been exposed to. Well, there's way more jobs than that. And then, by the way, Hollywood also kind of lies to us sometimes. Pen test jobs are like 95% sheer boredom and 5% sheer thrills, but that it doesn't change that much percentage wise because there's a lot of time you're going to spend just bashing your head against a digital wall trying to figure out how to get in, and every now and then you'll find something nobody else has found before. It's going to be super cool. But the point is that there's a lot of other jobs out there that you should be considering, right, Jason?
Yeah, most definitely, right? I mean, I get this all the time when people ask me, should they go to CYSA Plus, which is Cybersecurity Analyst, which is what SOC analysts get, versus Pentest Plus, which is pen testing. And pen testing is cool, it's sexy, it's what you see in the movies, it's the guy behind the keyboard hacking in and doing all sorts of cool stuff, right?
With a hoodie.
But the reality is there's 4 times as many security defense jobs as a SOC analyst than there are as pen testers. So there's a lot more jobs and job opportunity on the defense side than there are on the red team or the attack side. The other
Right.
thing is, if you're working in some place that's a high emulation environment, for instance, you're working for a red team for a bank or the government, and you're trying to emulate a Russian attacker or a Chinese attacker or whatever, some kind of high level APT, that is probably the most boring job as a pen tester, because you're sitting there and you're doing 90 hours of research to get your attack just so lined up so you could press the button and it'll be over in 30 seconds and they'll never see you coming, right? That's how you're trying to be an advanced state, nation state type hacker or a pen tester at that level of doing adversary emulation. It is really boring because it's so much research. And then the other side, if you're doing this for a commercial environment, most of the time you're spending your time doing the report after the engagement. And so
Yeah.
if you don't like report writing and writing out all these long reports and presenting them to the audience, pen testing is not going to be for you. What are some good jobs outside of pen testing that you see, Kim?
Oh my gosh. Well, there are actually way too many for us to cover here, but I'll name a couple, and then I'm going to point you to an episode that began a whole series of episodes that we did. But there are gosh, you could specialize in vulnerability management, for example, right? You could be somebody who goes out and scans systems looking for systems missing patches, systems that are not configured correctly, and that's a hugely important job. There's actually quite a bit of those types of jobs out there, a vulnerability analyst, and I try to encourage people who are just breaking in to cybersecurity to get good at that job, because not only are there a lot of those jobs out there, but that's one of the few jobs that you can actually practice for really well in your home laboratory environment, because you have everything you need. The only thing that I think might be a little difficult to emulate is some kind of a like enterprise patch management solution or something like that. But you definitely have all the scanning tools. You can get virtual machines for all your scanning targets. You can learn how to analyze the reports. And as I said, there's a lot of need for that. But anyway, that's top of mind for me. Do you have one that's top of mind for you?
So one of my favorite is actually malware analyst. It's a lot of fun if you like to be a kind of a code geek. You can go in and reverse engineer code. You can look at the binaries. You're trying to undo what the bad guy did to try to obfuscate the malware. And I just find that to be a lot of fun. And it's one of those things that it takes a higher skill set, so there's less people competing for those roles. And so if you can
Yeah.
prove to me that you can do that because you've experienced working on something like the Metasploit project or something like that, doing some of that volunteering, that would be able to get you into the door pretty easily, because there's not nearly as much competition for those roles, because it does require a lot of skill and a lot of programming
Right.
background. So that's another
Right.
one. IT auditor is another one I see a lot. People coming in from a management position or a accounting background, they can move into an IT auditor background, and they can work if you're really good with checklists and procedures. That's another good one inside of the way to kind of step your way into the role. And I know you mentioned the episode. It's episode 31, and it's called All the Jobs in a Large Cybersecurity Organization. This was about a 10 to 15 part series. This was the first one, is the overview. It kind of lists out all the jobs. And then each episode after that goes into one of those jobs and does a deep dive into it, so you know what's required, what it's like, and what it's like to be in that type of role on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think you should check that out. And we tried to make every episode in that series self-contained. There's actually a placemat. Well, we call it a placemat, but it's just sort of like an overview of the different services and the different teams in a typical large organization, cybersecurity org. And also in every one of those episodes, we invited a guest, somebody who has a significant amount of work experience in those areas that we reviewed. And so, if you want to hear from a person who works in, for example, cybersecurity architecture, well, we have somebody in that episode who can tell you what it was actually like for them, how they got into it, how they got started, how did they move up in their career. So, tons of value packed into each of the episodes in that series. So, okay. So
All right.
those are the five things, right?
Yeah, so those are the 5 things. So I'm just going to recap them again real quick. Number one, there are no real entry-level cybersecurity jobs, and you can look at episode 49 for that. We have number two, a cybersecurity's bachelor or master's degree will not guarantee that you're going to land a job, and no certification is really your golden ticket to employment. And this was in episode 55 or episode 4. You can also go into tip number 3. We were talking about you must have experience or no one is going to hire you. But you can't get experience without getting hired. And that makes it a fun conundrum, right? Well, if you
Mhm.
look at episode 55, you'll see how one of our students did just that. They got hired without the experience. And then we
58.
had 58. Yes, 58. What did I say?
I think you said
58.
55, but I wanted to make
Okay.
sure everybody knew it was really 58. Sorry.
Episode 58, which was last week. And then number 4, salary expectations. You need to understand you're not going to make $100,000 a year on day one, most likely, and you need to make sure you're pricing yourself right. Look at episode 13 for that. And then number 5, there's more than just pen testing roles, and a lot of the jobs can be boring, and even pen testing can be boring, but a lot of these jobs can be fun, and it really is what you make of it. And that series began on episode 31 with a great overview. So that is our episode for this week, and if you like the show, we would really appreciate if you could jump on over to iTunes and leave a review. Reviews are really the best way to tell podcast algorithms that you love the show and you want others to find out about it as well. So I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment and just leave a quick review. Thanks.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Your Cyber Path. Don't miss an episode. Press the subscribe button now. If you would like to learn more about how to get your dream cybersecurity job, then be sure to visit yourcyberpath.com, where you can access the show notes, search the archive of our top tips and tricks, and discover some fantastic bonus content.